Hi, and welcome to Faith, Hope, and Love During an Election. I'm so happy today to have Cindy Wang Brandt here talking with us. And Cindy is an author, and she wrote the book Parenting Forward, How to Raise Children with Justice, Mercy, and Kindness. And she's a podcaster and a speaker. And she's also the creator of a wonderful online community called Raising Children Unfundamentalists that you can find on Facebook.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So this series is all about political engagement, about what our hopes and dreams are regarding this upcoming election in the United States. Why don't you talk a little bit about where you're a local and kind of your perspective watching what's happening here?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's just kind of funny because before we started recording, I was telling you that my kids are going to school. And as I understand it, kids in America are having to do a combination of hybrid or online. And even if they do go to school, there's a lot of uncertainties. And so I joked that I would tell my kids, you better be thankful that you get to go to school. Think about the kids in America,
Right.
Which is such a reversal from, right, like American families saying, think of the starving children in Africa.
Exactly.
So it feels like the world has turned upside down, to quote Hamilton, to see America, one of the most powerful nations, kind of be crippled to be doing so terribly, honestly, in the COVID response. So I'm in Taiwan, where we've really done a stellar job in managing the pandemic, which is what makes it such a stark contrast. Like, we never went into lockdown. We've been able to just go do life normally. Our biggest complaint is that we can't go overseas. We can't fly anywhere because Taiwan's the only safe place. And when I see people complain about that here, I do sort of roll my eyes and think that's a first world problem. I don't know. It's hard watching what's happening in America because I have so many people I love and care about, and they're telling me how divisive it's become and how it just feels like it's tearing families apart. And because I have a parenting audience, I'm constantly getting concerns about, the grandparents treating the children in ways that they don't like, and how Thanksgiving is such a wreck because of different political opinions. So this divisiveness seems to be a real issue. So that's what it feels like. It's a little bit hard for me to know exactly what it's like. And I feel like I'm a lot more interested in like people's day-to-day life, right? Because I can only consume from media and social media what's happening. And I know that can be skewed and exaggerated. But at the same time, I talk to people like you or, friends, where they tell me stories, and then I see that it does reflect some of the larger trends of like divisiveness and just pain, honestly, pain and grief.
Yeah, and fear too. I mean, I think that the fact that, we haven't handled the pandemic well at all, obviously, and there's fear about businesses failing. That's fear, of course, about violence. There's fear of even like Trump refusing to leave if he loses the election. There's all unsettling fear, that I know all of us, and I'm sure it affects our children. My children are grown, so it's a different thing. But I do think about what if this had happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and I had 4 little kids at home observing how upside down everything has become, and just living with the kind of fears that we want our kids to feel confident and to feel taken care of. And my heart goes out to people who are parenting little kids right now.
I heard somebody who just had a baby and they're nursing their baby and feeling almost guilt that they brought a baby into this world that seems like such a mess right now.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreaking.
It is. It is. And it's a temptation sometimes to say, well, let's look at and there are some silver linings of things that we're learning, I think, as a culture. And um, I do see a lot of generosity as well in terms of, to your point about people's day-to-day lives. I am witnessing a lot of generosity and kindness, and I see people reaching out to help their neighbors. And so those things are happening as well. But in the kind of noise of social media, especially, there is so much divisiveness and real kind of disdain for the other, whoever the other is. When I was growing up, there was such a push always toward like being a good citizen, like all the little elementary schools at the end of the year, you could, a number of kids would get good citizen prizes, a little piece of paper with a star on it, saying that you were a good citizen. And that sort of, I don't know, that value that I think we want our children to have, to feel like they're part of a community and they're part of a larger whole, and that part of who they are is, part of their town, part of their city, part of their school. But it's true that these last few years have really attacked that value, I think, starting from the top. Every time that Donald Trump tweets something, it's often so divisive and hurtful. And I just think, there's a lot of healing that needs to happen.
Yeah. I love all that you're saying about citizenship, though. And I think that when we're talking about politics, I feel like when people use the word, oh, this is so political, or I don't like to be political, I think they are referring to the divisiveness and the rhetoric. But what political really ought to mean is what you just described, what it means to be part of community, what it means to do good for the whole. And I love this idea that politics is caring for people you don't know.
Right.
And I feel like it's a little bit of an abstract concept for kids, but yeah. So, I've been working on some children's books about kids and citizenship, and this is one of the things I really want to communicate to children, that being a good citizen means caring for people you don't know. And that's something that I think you do have to cultivate and compel kids, because they're so, right, they just see what's in front of them and who they see and who they care about. And we don't want to shame kids for feeling that, but to sort of lay the groundwork and cultivate that when they are developmentally able to conceptualize that there are people that exist outside of their purview, to be concerned for their welfare as well.
Yeah, the whole notion of the common good. Yeah, so to talk about like getting kids politically engaged, do you have certain sort of strategies or ideas around that people could use?
Well, I feel like the actual doing of democracy, of political engagement, is really not that difficult, right? It's making some phone calls, it's maybe, voting, it's some community organizing. Those are like, that's like the easy stuff. I think the harder part is the enfranchising, right? This idea that kids should be politically engaged. And I think that's the hurdle that we have to get through. Once you get past that, once you believe in the power of children to be politically engaged, then the actual doing of it is really not that hard. But there's just, what are the percentage of people who even vote? Adults, right? So like empowering people to be politically engaged is a problem for the adult population. And then for kids, it's even a bigger challenge, where people don't feel like kids should get involved. Whenever kids do get involved in anything, they're immediately criticized as being used by adults as pawns, or they say that kids shouldn't have to worry about politics, they should just play and go to school. Yeah, and then children, the ultimate injustice is that children don't get to vote. Right? It's like we tell our kids, oh, you're very important, you get to have a voice, we want to hear your ideas, and then we're like, but you don't get to vote.
Right.
Which I find to be very contradictory message that we're sending to kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's still a lot of work to be done in changing the minds of just culture at large and mainstream culture, and to break down those walls and to make accessible to children. And I mean, think about the kind of, so what the first step to being politically engaged is you have to be informed, right? You have to know what's happening. But how much of media is directed towards children? How much are journalism directed towards children? How much of the information that's important to make informed decisions are communicated in ways that are accessible to children?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Not very. There are some, and that's very encouraging. But compared to what's being given to adults,
Right.
there's a huge disparity.
Mm-hmm.
So how we can't expect kids to be informed when we're not giving them access to information.
Mm-hmm. Which maybe brings us back to our mutual work in terms of both of us being interested in writing for children. You know, that's maybe a call to action for us, right? To create content that respects their intelligence, but also presents them with ideas and also historical figures that they should know about. Makes me think of Deneen Aker's book, Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints, which is a wonderful, opening the door to informing kids about how the country has been shaped, how the world has been shaped, but also how one person can, make different choices and do tasks and stand up for the common good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so good. I think a lot of times we think about people who create media for children, they have to be age appropriate. We have to use age appropriate language and understand what they can receive developmentally. But a lot of times we confuse that with dumbing it down, right? We think, oh, we have to make a complex idea simple so that kids can understand. It's like, no, we make a complex idea accessible. I think that's different.
Mm-hmm.
Because access is allowing them to develop the skills to understand a complex idea. Simple is making a complex idea diluted so that to speak down to children. And I think that's the difference. And I'm not saying it's easy to do it one way, to do the access thing instead of the simplifying, but I feel like that should be the goal.
Right. And
that we strive for.
Relate to the content, if a 5-year-old is reading about, a historical figure or whatever, having some kind of way to open the door where they feel like their experience as a person or as a child is being reflected or related, just to know, because they're not going to think to themselves, oh, I should read this book about this, social justice hero because it'll better my mind. They want to know a story. They want to know what was that person afraid of, or what excited that person, and so on. So yeah,
that's so good. And you do such a great job of that.
Oh, thank you.
Bringing a child into the story of their world. But yeah, I mean, I just, my foundational belief and value is that we have a right to understand and to have a voice in the world that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what underlies everything that we do. So I feel like children have a right to that. They have a right to understand the world that they live in,
mm-hmm.
and a right to voice in that world.
Mm-hmm.
They have a right to the processes that shape the world that they live in, which is politics, right? The policies that are made in government impacts them in tremendous ways.
Mm-hmm.
So they really have a right to have a voice in how those decisions are made.
Mm-hmm. That was another question I was going to ask you, is tell us a little bit about the lens or lenses through which you view policy. What are some of the important policy changes you'd love to see, but also like what has shaped your own kind of political construction. So when you're seeing, like, I don't know, things being debated here about different policies, which ones kind of light you up and make you angry or excited or intrigued?
So I'm not a politician. I'm not even an activist. I am a writer. And I think that I think those are two different jobs. I think as a writer, I find myself to be, I want to talk about ideas, and I want to set forth a vision, and I want to speak truth, and I want to say what is the right way that we should go.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the thing is, the world is so complicated, and the actual carrying out of the vision is, it's not going to match the vision. Right. And I think that's the job of policymakers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I think there's always going to be things to criticize the government about and the policymakers about. And I think that's also our job as citizens, right? To hold them accountable, to say that this is what we want, and to tell them what they're doing wrong. Not to like make their jobs difficult, but that's literally like our job in a democracy, is to hold them accountable and to tell them to move towards the vision that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I just feel like that needs to be clear in my mind, because I feel like in the social media world, a lot of authors are also activists, or they sound like activists. And it's like, well, we there is a different role, you know? And so like a lot of people will say, okay, people on Twitter are so divisive, or they're so idealistic. And it's like, yeah, but that's our job. My job as an author and a writer is to be idealistic. I'm not going to speak anything less than what I think is ideal, because I think it's the right thing to do. So when I say things like, well, everyone should be included, right? Like everyone should be loved, that's not going to be possible. Even when we say Black Lives Matter, it's like, Black lives don't matter. They don't. That's why we have protests in the streets, right? But we're not going to stop saying that Black lives matter. And that's not being idealistic. That's not being divisive. That's just speaking truth, you know? And so, yeah, I guess I don't think too much about how to make policies, what kind of policies should be made. I don't really feel like it's my job. You know, I'm not running for anything. I'm not becoming a policymaker, but I still think of myself as an active part of the society that we live in. But I played a different role in sort of calling out the truth and setting forth a vision and holding my elected leaders accountable to what I believe is best for the community.
Mm-hmm. I like that you say this about kind of putting forth a vision, and that's kind of how I feel too with the different books I've written, also for adults, but that I'm sort of imagining what I'd like the world to be like, you know. And so like with my picture books thus far, you know, it presents what could be, or and of course it's imperfect in our you know, that won't ever happen, right? But maybe I can love my neighbor too, and maybe I can do these things. And I have the same sense of passion about sort of these aspirational but true imaginings about what the world could be like. And my hope is, of course, that, you know, good conversations, good children's books, good books for adults can kind of open up people's imagination, make them imagine something better, and not just kind of be mired in you know, how things really are now. So I like that. I like your idea about that vision and imagining a different future, perhaps. But
I just feel like sometimes we get attacked because we're like, people say, oh, come on, live in the real world. Right. And it's like, I do live in the real world, but that does not mean I'm going to stop calling people towards my utopia. Right? Like, I think that's what we do. We're always portraying our utopia. And I don't know, to me, there's really, I don't want to speak any less than that, just because it can't be reality, or it can't be real yet. Because we have to see something towards it.
Right. And name it and imagine
that's
it.
Right.
Call it in that way. I love that. And that kind of brings me to something else I wanted to bring up with you, which is that with your work with your book, but also with your work with Raising Children Unfundamentalist.
It's a mouthful.
Well, I know, I don't want to say RCU because not everyone maybe is familiar with them,
Yeah.
but it's really so much about healing from trauma. That's something that I've noticed as being part of that group, is that a lot of people have real sort of spiritual or emotional or combination of trauma that they either had as children or even as adults and young parents. And I think, I love again, you're like calling into the vision. We can do this a different way. How can we be curious and do this a different way that's healthier? How can we heal from trauma? And I wanted to ask you, like, how did you come to the point of creating that group and having this passion for helping people to heal from spiritual trauma, among others? But
Thank you so much that means so much to me that you see that about my group. Because yeah, that is what I'm trying to do. The group has been around for a while, I would say 3 or 4 years, and it's changed like everything, because it's made of human beings. It changes and evolves, and because I am the founder and the leader and I cultivate the culture of that group, it's kind of changed with me. And I think that understanding that my background growing up in evangelical Christianity was a source of trauma for me helped me understand that, okay, it just names that experience so that I know how to heal from it and how to recover from it. And I was talking about this with one of the members in that group. I said, there's a lot of spaces that talk about faith deconstruction in an intellectual way. So it's deconstructing the doctrines that we learn that we don't agree with anymore. And that's very important, because yeah, if you're changing your beliefs about foundational doctrines, that's a huge job, and sort of wrestling with that requires a lot of support. But for me, I've just kind of moved past that because I've already kind of done that work. But then understanding that, well, it wasn't just that I believe things that I've changed my mind on. That's a big deal. But the bigger deal is the impact of the spiritual trauma on my life that affects me so much more holistically. That's what I have to address at this point of my faith journey. And that's not intellectual. That's emotional. It's social.
yeah,
And it's a lot of body work. So taking care of your body. So I remember one particularly hard year when I experienced trauma. I remember I went, so we have a lot of waterfalls. I live on a tropical island and we have a lot of waterfalls, and I would take trips out to waterfalls all the time. And in hindsight, it was like my body was seeking healing. Right? Like it was literally taking me towards water, which we know water is so healing. And I wasn't particularly conscious of it at the time. I mean, I was like, oh yeah, I just kept wanting to go. And that's the kind of work, it's a lot harder to debate on Facebook, right? Because it's so personal and it's so embodied. But I'm so much more interested in that because I think that's what's actually more helpful for a lot of people who have experienced spiritual trauma or any kind of other trauma. And so I've been learning, and a lot of the work that I do online, I don't feel like I'm teaching. I feel like I'm learning and sort of inviting others to learn with me. And so I'm really encouraged that you can see that in my group, that I'm trying to help people come along this journey of discovering what it means to recognize that what you experienced was trauma and how to move on from there.
And then it's further complicated when you have children of your own and you feel there are things you want to share and there are things you want to pass along in terms of the faith that the bits of it you love or believe in or want to cherish, and then I mean, everyone I know who has come out of that sort of situation, we all talk about how do you communicate the things you want to communicate without having him have any toxicity attached to it? And how do you, I feel fortunate that, now my kids are adults, and so their faith, as it always was, is their own, and they've all come to different sort of conclusions, and I wouldn't say conclusions, because I think our faith journeys, continue throughout our lives, right? But
Right.
it has been really fascinating to see, just to see how that plays out from somebody from birth to 24, or
Yeah. And it's interesting, even in like the most fundamentalist versions of this faith, you see families raise kids that grow up to have totally different faith persuasions. So faith is too wild to nail down. And for parents to think that they can control it
yeah.
is an illusion, and it just has the capacity to damage, and it doesn't have any, there's no good in it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so great that you're celebrating your kids' various expressions of their faith, and
I
making room
always
for
had
new
that.
people.
I always had a sense that it wasn't mine to legislate or to, we had faith practices that we did as a family, but I guess I really just trusted that that's between them and God. That
Mhm.
they will be moved by certain things. They will feel certain things are true, and certain things are compasses for them, or certain things are maps for them. And it's fascinating to see it kind of uh, play out in its various ways, and
Yeah. Well, what I always tell parents who are anxious about how to instruct their kids in faith is that, don't think of yourself as the instructor, think of yourself as the learner.
mhm,
Right? How do our kids instruct us in faith?
mhm,
Because a lot of times they have a better posture than we do.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Especially if they haven't been traumatized spiritually, and they can just be open and
Right.
kind of follow their intuition. And yeah, yeah, definitely.
Mm, yeah.
So, what are some of the best practices that you have when someone, I know people do ask you this very specifically, like, what are the best practices for, you know, raising kids who love kindness and mercy? That's not only for the parents who are recovering from trauma or abuse, but what are the positive, do you have like a little basket of best practices that you say to parents about how best to raise their children?
I always say this: the best way to raise kind kids is to be kind to your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean this in that you model kindness, which is always the best way of teaching anything, is to model it. But just to point to the importance of how kids, they have to be self-centered. It's actually developmentally normal for them to be self-centered, because they're establishing the security of their own identity. And you know psychologists have mapped out certain ages for certain stages, but it's not exact. Every kid has their own timeline, and we can't always know because our children are so unique. And so I don't like to push kids to like generosity and because we don't know when they're ready for that kind of act, when they're ready for being able to care for other people. But we can always be kind to them and learn what gives them that security, give them the resources that they need to feel secure, so that when they are ready, then they can, the whole point of, right, like attachment to our kids is so that they can go out and make secure relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, if you want them to be kind to others, if you want them to treat other people with respect and compassion, and establish healthy, authentic, reciprocal relationships with people outside of your family, it's just so important to create a safe environment for them in the home. And so, yeah, the best way to raise kind kids is to be kind to your kids. And we're learning so much about what that means to be kind to our kids, So like no spanking, no verbal abuse. I mean, those are kind of obvious things, but like there's a lot of strategies that's more concrete and practical. And well, what does that look like if your kid is biting? And those are the things we talk about in the group, and share ideas with other parents. But yeah, but like same thing with the political engagement. The actual doing of it is sort of the easiest part. The harder part is, okay, understanding this is the goal. Our goal is to be kind to our kids. How then do we do that? Then we can work out the practicalities.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and they do watch us. That's the other thing. When you say it's the best way to do things is just to do it or to model it, and not to be talking about it, not to be lecturing about it. But it is interesting and terrifying as I watch my kids sort of go through college and move on. I see certain things that they do that they saw my husband and I do, like just weird little quirky things or whatever that I would never think that we had passed along, but we do. We pass these things along, and yeah, I mean, I think there's so much pressure, and this speaks to the situation for parents right now in the United States, is that they have their kids at home so much because the ones who are not going to school, and they need to be teachers and parents and all these things all at once. And I've been trying in conversations that I've had with people who are raising younger children to kind of give lots of room for doing this differently. This pandemic has changed us, and there are parents who I think are feeling a lot of stress to try to do everything right and to keep the kids from, falling behind or whatever the concerns are. And my concern about that is that that's probably pushing some parents to, just unbelievable stress levels. And that's when I think when parents are pulled and pushed financially and in terms of their sleep and their self-care, that's when I think some abuse could happen, in a home. And I have concerns about that in terms of this situation. There's some home, I mean, obviously there's a lot of children for whom school is a safe place, and school is a place where they can be themselves and they aren't being verbally or physically abused. So, that's this little underlying thing that worries me about this time. But I do think just that model of just deciding, the advice I've been giving to parents when they're saying they're feeling really stressed out with having kids at home is just to sort of understand that we're in a time where it doesn't matter if the child doesn't move up to the next level in math or reading. That will come, that really will come. I mean, I know that I worried about stuff like that as a young parent. I worried that one of my kids wasn't tying his shoes by a certain age. I mean, obviously he's now tying his shoes, it all comes. But I hope parents can kind of be kind to themselves and practice some self-care, and also just know that really the important thing is that loving relationship that you're building and that trust. And it's been kind of moving to me. Where I live, I can see out to different backyards, behind my house. And next door, a young woman who had graduated from college had a job in New York City. When lockdown happened, she came home, and I'm just seeing this lovely blooming in a new way of her relationship with her parents, and so, we see each other over the fence, and she's cutting their hair or they're eating outdoors together. And I know that they were loving parents. And so in a time of crisis, and, specifically with this pandemic, she came home and she had a safe place. And because of all those years of care and trust and respect that they shared, now they can be this little family unit again until it's time for her to go back to her adult life, in New York. And so, yeah, I always try to tell people that the relationship piece is so key, because you are building sort of this trust. And then whether they're learn how to do long division or whatever, that'll come.
Yeah. This is really such a hard time. I mean, I feel like it's kind of the Serenity Prayer, right? There are things we cannot control, there are so many things that we cannot control. And so, yeah, maybe your kids will fall behind, but there's nothing you can do about that, right?
Right.
So then how can we make the best of it? And I see parents making the best of it in just such creative and
Mhm.
beautiful ways. And that's been very inspiring to me. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think I don't, I think it's easy to, I think you referred to this earlier. We don't want toxic positivity, right? We don't want to like find silver linings that's not there
Right.
just to like make things feel better. We want to validate the pain and the grief.
Mhm.
But I think that, well, we don't have a choice to be in this pandemic.
Mhm.
So but we do have a choice in how we move through it.
Yeah. Right.
So I hope that together as a global community that we can move through it with love and compassion and creativity and generosity and all of the good things. Yeah, that's something that we do have control over.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that seems like a good sort of putting a button on this conversation, because we don't have an answer to any of all this, but we know that we can treat each other kindly. We can empower and respect our children. um,
Yeah.
we can raise people who are mindful that they're not just on their own, that they're part of a larger community. And I think that will be, not a silver lining, but that will be a result of this really difficult time, is that people are coming together in different ways. And I think there have been so many revelations and reckonings and uh, just disturbances in the way that we've always done things. So it does feel like there's this possibility for change, on many different levels. And um, I'm so interested to see what kids, even my youngest who's 18 and doing her first year of college from home, how will this affect her? She's having a very different experience of her freshman year of college than my older three. And what is she making of that? How will that,
Yeah.
and her exposure to you know everything from that's kind of stemmed out of George Floyd's murder. She's been tracking the news in a different way because she's home all the time, and
Mm,
she's reading books that she probably wouldn't have been interested in reading or exposed to. And
mm.
this generation of kids might be a really interesting, power
Yeah.
powerful one in terms of promoting the common good, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting to think about what's going to be spoken of about the pandemic 10 years or 20 years from now.
Hmm.
I think I like to think that way because it takes me away from this present moment as a coping mechanism.
That's
But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the impact of all this, and hopefully there's some good that
yeah,
comes of it.
I hope so too. Well, I want to invite everyone who's listening and who will later watch or listen to this to find Cindy online. So, what are some of the places that people can connect with you or find you?
Well, you can search my group, Raising Children on Fundamentalist, on Facebook. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Parenting Forward. Um, yeah, I'm kind of everywhere. Just Google Cindy Wang Brandt.
I really appreciate the work that you do and the good that you're putting into the world. And I love our shared vision that we can just imagine something better than what's now, and we can help to bring it about in tiny ways, or in bigger ways.
That's
But
right.
anyway, so thank you
Yeah.
so much for this time.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.